Hello, everyone, and welcome to Eruditionalism, where I invite my friends, family, and colleagues on to discuss difficult and engaging topics with me. Today, I met with my uncle, Sean Lawrenson, to discuss human cloning, as well as a few other areas of interest, such as the parameters you might use to measure human evolution or devolution, as well as population growth. Neither of us are professionally qualified to discuss these topics in any capacity, but we decided to do it anyways, and we had a great time. I hope that you enjoy the show as much as we did.
Uh, so to start off, hi, my name is Sean Lawrenson. I am actually Christian's uncle. I have been a garbage man for close to 30 years. I I have two daughters. I am divorced of many years, and I really enjoy life just at this point. It's a lot of fun.
That's good. That's good. Life can be really difficult, and I've got a lot of admiration for the way that you've lived your life in some respects. The I tend to be a bit of a job hopper, so the fact that you've been able to stick to something for decades upon decades, that I try to keep that in mind just to balance myself out a little bit. But
Right.
appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. We've had lots of interesting conversations in the past about all kinds of different things, and one of the things I'd like to talk to you about today, because why the hell not, is human cloning. So,
I'm all in.
all right. The I've been kicking this idea around for a while about when you talk about human cloning, the big issues always come up. You know, what is it going to do socioeconomically, culturally, etc., and the ethics that come into play. And those are good things to consider. But I think there are other topics as well revolving around it that are relevant. But do you have any preliminary thoughts on the big picture things? What does human cloning bring to mind?
It depends upon, well, the first in my mind, the first level of human cloning wouldn't be a full-on clone of another person. It would be essentially cloning my heart because mine went bad, and then I would have a heart transplant of my own heart that my body wouldn't reject, and possibly you could even take whatever birth defects out of my heart and give me a good heart of my own. That level of human cloning sounds amazing, except that it comes up with a price tag, and sadly there's going to be people who are left out. You start looking at limited immortality at that point, because if I can clone any part of my body that I have the money to have replaced, I can essentially live forever. But a lot of people wouldn't have the money for that. How do you balance that out?
Yeah, yeah, that would be interesting as well, especially if you create like a full clone that you use for spare parts, so to speak. That could be really ethically dicey.
Yeah, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about growing a new hand, because quite literally I've broken my right hand 4 times in my life. I'm expecting at some point it to cause me problems, so I'm going to get a little arthritic there.
Yeah,
But
probably.
how great would it be if I could just grow a new hand in a bell jar and have somebody attach it later in life? I got a brand new hand that's never been broken. The cartilage is great. Not even talking about growing a full human, just growing the hand. Sounds great, but at some point sadly you end up cheapening life, because you never really get old and you never die except in a car accident, if you have the wealth to keep buying new body parts.
Okay. Do you think we're past that threshold already? I mean, we're living far longer than humans ever have prior to 200 years ago.
I we're still well we're This is a different topic entirely, but I believe we are. Well, no, I'm just going to be honest. The way you asked the question, the way I phrased it, no, we are not cheapening life, because you are still getting old and dying, is what it comes down to. You are still getting aged. You're just doing it later. Even my generation, I'm Gen X. I'm currently 48. I often refer to myself as 50, just for easy math. 50-year-olds today in 2023 do not look like 50-year-olds looked in 1970. This is not what 50 looked like 30, 40 years ago. 50-year-olds used to look old, and now they just look gray. You're not going to think you're not going to think I'm 25, but I don't, other than a few wrinkles and a bit of gray, I don't look that much different than I did at 22.
But that was a lot worse, 50 years ago.
Way worse. You looked wildly different. You look old at 50, 40 years ago.
Okay. Hmm. Is that just quality of life and medicine, you think?
In by and large, yes. I mean, I heard somebody make the point forever ago that the work of work is not nearly the work it used to be. I know you know quite a bit about construction. Think about just getting shingles up onto the roof to reshingle a roof. I'm not talking about any of the rest of it, just getting the shingles themselves up there. These days, you have a boom truck that will lift them all, or at very least, a weird ladder with a pulley system to pull it. It's not throw this 80-pound thing of shingles and climb a ladder with one hand. You're not carrying it up on your shoulder. Work is not nearly as hard on a body as it used to be. All of our tools make that much easier.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And I'd say that's pretty much a positive thing overall, although it seems to have some negative side effects. But
No, I mean, nothing is perfect, but in general, it's overwhelmingly very good. But getting back to the cloning part, we're living so much longer because we aren't wearing our bodies out as much. But that said, we still do get old. Our bodies do still wear out. We will still reach a point of critical failure in our body's existence.
okay,
And
okay.
if you were to, aside from the brain, if you were able to replicate any and all of my body parts as needed, the only thing you would ever suffer from truly would be Alzheimer's or dementia.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you
Hmm.
could, barring a brain thing like that, you could effectively live forever. And I don't, you get into a weird conversation of how, if you are in today's money a multi-billionaire, money becomes of no value to you. You have so much of it, you no longer value it. If you could effectively live forever, is life even special anymore? And that's just the first stage of human cloning.
Well, do you think that cloning poses that as a unique risk, whereas brain transplants from existing people doesn't?
The brain itself is still always going to ultimately degenerate, but I mean, a brain transplant in of itself, I don't I don't know that that's feasible. The Granted, each brain and each hand and whatever is all very unique, but the neural pathways are formed in such a way that I don't know if it would even be possible to put your brain into my body.
I think you
I
could put
don't
it
know.
there, but would it work?
Right.
That's the question.
I don't know that the pathways would even connect properly. I don't
Hmm.
I don't think our science is to that level yet.
Okay. Okay. Hmm. Right. So that would pose a somewhat. Well, here's the other question then. Who's to say that two genetic duplicates will grow neural pathways that are identical and compatible with each other? Because the nervous system reconstructs itself and activates new genomes the more stress that it's under, and essentially builds itself as an adaptive thing to your external experience. Do you think that would pose any compatibility issues?
It would, if you're talking effectively, you're talking about identical twins. And at that point, it's more a matter of life experience versus whatever else. As long as their life experience hasn't been too wildly different, it should be possible. But now you're getting into where most people would start talking about real cloning issues.
Hmm.
Cloning my hand, cloning my heart, whatever. It all seems very much like a good idea, but there is the risk of cheapening life as a whole. But what if we can clone a whole human? What if we clone me completely? And if you're able to do that, adjust the genomes to take out my genetic birth defects. We're not talking about how I broke my hand, because this copy of me has never broken its hand, so it doesn't have the cartilage damage. The Whatever birth defects aren't there, is that clone me? Or is it its own unique thing? And you get into a weird discussion. The short answer is, even though it's genetically identical to me, it's not me, because it hasn't lived the last 48 years. It hasn't spent nearly 30 years driving a garbage truck. It doesn't know how to turn the traction control off in the Miata and go all kinds of sideways in the snow.
Well,
It's
even if it did, and you guys had a generally identical life experience, so to speak, you're still distinct individuals, like identical twins who lead very similar lives and were raised together.
right. But the identical twins didn't date the same girl on the same night and have the same interaction. You
True.
That's why you have a Keith and a Kevin. They're not the same person.
Right.
They
Right.
they just aren't, even if they were identical twins. But if you usually, when people talk about cloning, we talk about a science fiction level where you're essentially replicating me as a person. I'm dying. We managed to make an exact copy of me, maybe a younger version, and put all of my brain waves and all of my memories into that new body. This old body dies off, and now that then you got a different question. Is that Sean or is that not Sean? If it has all of my memories and all of my life experiences and it remembers them as vividly as I do, is it a different person?
That's
And
an interesting question. I mean, it's basically a digital copy, right?
right,
Because you don't get transferred in unless, I mean, assuming that transferring everything from one brain into another is way beyond what we could even conceptually try to understand. But duplicating, that's it seems a
that's
lot closer in the future. So
right,
you could make a copy and you don't know what the copy ends up being, but you would still die. You've just created something new. And the question is, what is that new thing?
right. And now put that into a societal level. So we're just going to hypothetically say that a lot of these things are accepted and understood, and we're not going to go down a bunch of different rabbit holes, but we can conceptually we can clone a body. We can take a sample of you. We can grow a new me in a test tube. At the age, anytime after age 70, or if you were given a 12-month, you're dying of cancer, you got 12 months to live, either or, you reach the age of 70 or you are given 12 months to live, you were allowed to have your clone grow. You were allowed to make a copy of you and put that new you into existence. But the new me is going to be the 25-year-old me. It's not going to be 70-year-old Sean. It's 25-year-old Sean all over again. And you give it my social security number, my name, and my car and all that stuff. Is it me? And how do you deal with that as a society? How do you go, yes, I was 70 3 days ago, now I'm 25?
Well,
And that's
what if we leave the brain copying out of it completely? We treat it as if it's a new citizen. It just has identical genetics to you. So you could have children, perhaps like Boba Fett, where you it's just a clone that you've raised.
then you're talk then I a genetic copy with none of my memories will never be me.
Yeah,
Even going the route of Boba Fett versus Jango Fett. Boba Fett and Jango Fett, despite identical genetics, are two completely unique individuals.
that's true.
The,
Yeah.
the ethics and the issues regarding cloning revolve much more around what makes a person unique and separate from another person. And if 70-year-old Sean is given 12 months to live, so we grow the new Sean, and even if we go the whole sci-fi route and actually transfer my consciousness into that new body and I become 25 again, am I still me?
Well, here's a better question. Why does that question matter?
Because in a legal sense, you have to define who died and who's alive, and how do you deal with last will and testament and life insurance policies and all of the messiness of society. Instead of leaving my vast fortune of a couple $100 to my children, I now leave my vast fortune to myself. And my children are now in their late 40s and I'm 25, and I'm calling my daughter up going, what in the hell is wrong with you? Don't you know that I raised you? And she's looking at me going, you're 20 years younger than me. What are you talking about? I mean, I know that you're my dad, but it's not the same. Would my 45-year-old daughter look at 25-year-old Sean and still respect me the way I was when I was 25 years older than her?
Well, almost certainly not. Almost certainly not. Things would be very jarring and different. And with regards to the legal proceedings, you basically have to pick option A or option B. Either you're an independent entity, and the prior version can choose to do with that person as they so please, transfer everything or not.
Start right. But all of this gets into the real issues of cloning, and there's a lot of things that are very fun in the way of science fiction, but get very messy in the way of real life. Movies have a great way of making things look and sound and seem appealing, but if you actually live those lives, it's not nearly as much fun as it might seem. A very simple example would be, and it's a very rudimentary base level fantasy of all 12, 13, 14-year-old boys. We all want to be 28-year-old Ryan Reynolds, walk into a bar, rich, famous, gorgeous, and just point and go, you, and you're coming home with me. And they all go, oh God, yes, please. Even if you were able to do that, it cheapens what sex is. I want it to mean something. Yeah, maybe I'm unique in that. I'm certainly not the only one who thinks that way. But if you really are able to just have your pick of women or have your pick of men with little or no resistance, it loses a lot of the magic. I'm not saying you want to absolutely scrape it, but there needs to be a little challenge to it. You need to actually engage with somebody, have a conversation, have some reason why you want this person around.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one of the one of the cases I'd like to make regarding human cloning would be you'd have more data points on past experience effectively. Because, for example, you know what your father has done with his life, and maybe things that have gone well for him, and things that have not gone well for him. But you're clearly distinct individuals, not just in terms of experience, but you've got very distinct temperaments and genetic makeups. If
Right.
you had perhaps 7 generations of genetic duplicates that all lived independent lives, and maybe they were raised by each other, maybe they lived completely separately, you could take the information on what they enjoyed, what worked well for them, and what they recommend to future selves, and use that to make more informed decisions about your life.
That that is a great point. I actually really appreciate that. But we still run into there's another problem with cloning, and it it piggybacks off of what I was saying before about cheapening life as a whole. If there is not a finite length of life, if life becomes infinite, then it becomes valueless. For the old argument that you can't really experience happiness unless you also experience sadness. It's I'm not saying that I want people to suffer mightily. I'm not saying I want anybody to really die. I'm saying if you don't die, then there becomes very little point to life. And if you create one copy after another of me, along with the cheapening of life, part of being alive, part of the genetic makeup of honestly life as a whole, all of life everywhere as we know it, one of the primary driving forces is to procreate and perpetuate the species. If I can clone myself indefinitely, I still am going to want to have children. And if they can clone themselves indefinitely, you very quickly come into a real population problem. I mean,
Do we have a
very quick.
population right now? A population problem right now?
Well, but imagine it getting worse exponentially. I mean, it is bad and it is getting worse, but imagine now the best, brightest, richest have access to, just to pick a name, Elon Musk. Imagine he can clone himself and even transfer his mind into that clone, but put himself in a genetically perfected 25-year-old body. And then he makes another clone of himself and raises that clone as his son. And or even if he just continues to clone himself indefinitely, if he doesn't die, then the population never averages out. The population only grows, it never shrinks. And there is a limited capacity for how many humans the earth can possibly feed.
Okay.
And then again, you run into problems with cloning of how do you tell Elon Musk, who can very much afford to keep cloning himself indefinitely, that he has to let himself die because a bunch of poor people in various parts of the world are having babies like normal people
Well,
because they
a couple of things with that. The first would be if clones if clones were to continue for the next 100 generations or so, you it seems to me that you've taken the stance that your clone isn't you, so he would have died, right? Because if the clone's not the exact same person, if they're is it still me or is it not me? And I think you lean one way, they're clearly not. Then the individual has definitely died, and all of the new individuals are raised in each generation's environment and experience. And sure, the mantle gets passed along, but those would all have individual experiences and be individuals with similar
sure,
DNA.
but for the point I'm making is that you're correct. I tend to lean, barring that we get to the sci-fi thing where I can hook a thing up to my head and my consciousness transfers, and barring that, yes, each subsequent clone is its own unique individual, and maybe some amount of genetic memory is passed along, but as a whole, it's a new person.
Yeah.
Even so, Elon Musk 2.0, Elon Musk 3.0, Elon Musk 27.3 all exist. Elon Musk himself, a variation of him, continues to exist, where in current times, Elon Musk will cease to exist. So a version of Elon Musk will continue to be here indefinitely, but the poor people who have no access, who don't have access to this, will still also be having babies. So the birth rate will continue, but the death rate will drop off dramatically. So how do you deal with a continuous birth rate but no death rate to compensate?
Well, I guess my question would be, what's stopping somebody who wants to do that from having children like normal? Elon Musk has like 10 children.
They would have children, and that's my point. He would continue. That's my point. Is people, a clone of me, even just a genetic clone, not my consciousness, is going to want to have babies. He just is. My genetic clone in my DNA. I cannot tell you why. I cannot tell you how. I can only tell you that I flat out knew I wanted to have children.
Yeah.
I just did. And any clone of me will want to. But the point is, if there's still a Sean Lawrenson in this world, he will also procreate. And everybody's going to keep procreating, but the birth rate is generally a balance of the birth and death rate. But what if you separate the two, the birth rate is still, we'll just say 3 to 1, there's 3 births for every 1 death. But now the death rate, because cloning is relatively inexpensive, the death rate drops from 3 to 1 down to, it drops way off. Suddenly 1 in every 3 people are dying versus, 5 out of 5. You have a population control problem very quickly gets out of control.
What
And
what what leads you to think that people would produce clones in a fashion that's disproportionate to the way they produce offspring normally?
they wouldn't produce them in an irrational sense. My point is, I'm currently 50. I'm likely going to live to 80. That's just current statistics. So in 30 years, I will not be here. But if I create a clone of me, and again, not talking about me, yes, it's a unique individual, but that clone is replacing me. That my clone will take my place and continue to live on in my honor, in my namesake. It's
Yeah, I
not
get
me,
that.
but okay. So then you start over. You now have my 80 years start over, because granted the clone is genetically 25, but it's only a year old. There's now an extra 80 years of Sean Lawrenson on the planet. And that Sean Lawrenson will also have children. So generally speaking, me and my ex-wife, we had 2 children. So when I die and my ex-wife dies, our children replace us in the population count, and then they will have children that replace them. But if there is another me, I never disappear. I never disappear from the math equation. I am 1, my daughters are 2 and 3. I should die off, and then my daughters will have 4 and 5. But what if I don't die off? And what if they continue to have children? And what if the new version of me doesn't have 4 and 5, but has 6 and 7? It's a exponentially bad situation population wise.
Well, but my question is, so it seems to me like you're assuming that once you introduce human cloning, the rate that people will reproduce, whether it's naturally or synthetically, will increase dramatically.
Yes.
And and I guess my question is, why do you assume that people would create more humans because they have the option to synthetically than they would to anyways organically? I mean, if
Vanity.
that's well, but the exponential problem that you're outlining is already present with natural procreation. I mean,
It
my mother has 12 children. Your sister, you know this well.
right. The difference is in present times without cloning, you have you have factors, you have additional factors that limit your ability to have children. I don't, generally speaking, economic. If I have children, I have to feed them. If I have children, I have to clothe them. I have to make sure they get an education. All of these things.
Hmm.
If I clone myself and my new 25-year-old body continues on after I am 80 and dead, then that clone will also want to have children, which will
No, I
have to
get
be fed
that.
in, which will
Yeah, but
have to
your
be fed.
children will want to do that too. So
Right.
you could
But
treat your clone as a son, so to speak. And I'm not seeing the difference in the synthetic creation versus the organic creation.
the difference is the longevity. The difference is longevity. I only have 80 years on this planet, and I mean, technically, men can procreate through almost the entirety of their life. Women hit menopause, different argument. But if I live to 80, I'm only able to procreate. I have chosen to have a vasectomy. I am done having, this version of Sean is done having children. But a new 25-year-old Sean is going to want to have children of his own. But my 2 daughters are still here. And now I'm still here. And now I am having 2 more children. And the cycle continues on because I live such an extended life. You now have a real population problem throughout the world. Honestly, there's a real population problem with people who are very poor. They tend to have too many children for their economic status. I'm not trying to be any kind of way. I'm just saying this is what generally happens. What if you have that same problem at the very top of the scale? What if you have a problem of people who can afford all of this to clone themselves and continue on essentially indefinitely, where 25-year-old Sean, you know, now has 45-year-old daughters, and he has a daughter. Now their sisters are the age of their grandparents, and it all gets very messy because the people with access to wealth and cloning, for reasons of vanity, are completely able to continue on and perpetuate the species at a rate that is irresponsible.
You're definitely losing me a little bit here.
Sean A lives to 80. Sean B picks up the mantle, being 25 when the first one dies at 80.
But how is that
But
scenario any different than having, other than the genetic oddities that come along with having your your
you're
predecessor's children be 45 years old? I'm not I'm not following
the
how that is a unique scenario to you having two daughters and one son,
the
other than the genetic awkwardness with, oh
the
yeah,
there's
she's 45 and technically my genetic offspring.
right, but the the difference becomes 50-year-old Sean had long ago decided he was done having children. So, and different people decide at different places. Your parents decided at a different point than I did. You may decide at the same point I did. You may decide at a different point. That's a very individual thing. But 80-year-old Sean dies off. 25-year-old Sean picks up the mantle. 25-year-old Sean wants to have children again. That's something that shouldn't happen because of the longevity, because of my youth. I am now not just keeping myself in the population pool, I am adding to the population pool in an unnatural manner because of my own internal desires.
So it's because it's unnatural. It's because it's synthetic rather than organic that it becomes an ethical issue. Because you
It
having two daughters and then one clone, in terms of growth rate for the population, is significantly less than one person having 12 children.
absolutely, but it's it's the synthetic. The problem with cloning in general, with all of the discussion of it, becomes the base ethics of, is a clone you, is a clone not you? What does a clone's right? What rights does a clone have or not have? And what can it do and what can it not do? And there comes a place where you have to start asking very tricky questions. And I think this is a very fair question of 50-year-old Sean decided almost 20 years ago he was not having any more children. In my early 30s, I had a vasectomy. I was done having children. But 25-year-old Sean still wanted them. If I add a new Sean to the equation, that's not that big a deal. But if the new Sean also wants to have children, then you're really weirdly adding to the system. And assuming that I don't blow all of my money and end up broke living in a gutter, there will be a Sean 3.0 who will also want to have two children. And Sean will continue making children every single iteration of him, which is going to be an exponential problem over the course of multiple generations because I never ultimately die. And because I ultimately never die, I continue to procreate. It,
Okay.
and and you are correct in that. What's the difference between that and somebody having 12 children? Well, the difference is at any one point in time, I only have to have a four-door car. I don't have to have a 15-passenger van. I don't have to go to Costco to buy groceries for a week. I can still take my kids to the Olive Garden and sit in a normal booth. I'm having as many or ultimately even more children over the course of time, but the financial impact, the way it affects me personally, any given generation of me, is vastly different and much more manageable.
Are you concerned with the genetic composition of the population over time?
That would definitely become a, well, for the sake of this conversation, we're assuming that cloning is a perfect process, which it certainly wouldn't be. A copy of a copy of a copy degenerates over time. We know that. It's actually why humans age. Our cells are replicating themselves continuously. The replication isn't perfect, which is why we age. But assuming that we're making so many assumptions in this argument that you would have to assume that genetic level cloning was a perfected science, that there would not be degeneration over
Yeah,
time.
we've got it. We'll assume it's perfectly figured out. But
Right.
is that one of your concerns?
That's nothing I would be concerned about. The concern with that would be, you have, again, just using me, you've got Sean 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, each one having two children, sometimes boys, sometimes girls, sometimes a mix. What happens when my daughters, my present daughters who are in their 80s and have grandchildren in their 20s, and I have long lost, Sean 3.0 has long lost touch with these girls because they just want nothing to do with me. What happens when my daughter's grandchildren start dating my son? That is, we well know there's a problem with procreating with people who are too close to us genetically. That it's a problem for birth defects, and that is a problem that would likely come into play.
Yeah, yeah, that would be a concerning issue for sure. Hmm. Okay. I wonder how that could be managed, if it offers any utility.
Well, there's also a question that I had, and it's an interesting question, and somebody may well have done the math. You could maybe Google it up or look at. There is a there are only so many genetic possibilities while you are still human. There are only so many ways human DNA can be written and still be human. At some point, you become something else, a chimpanzee, a frog. We'll go the route of X-Men, a mutant, you're Wolverine or Magneto or whatever. There is some point at which you are no longer human. And taking all of the genetic defects and all of the things, all of the different things that you can be born with, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, taking all of that out, just making you a normal average person, there's only so many combinations of DNA that are possible. Now, granted, it's a very large number, but there's still only so many possibilities.
It's up there.
But how many is it? And if you start cloning and if you start dealing with all this stuff, you're going to eventually run into where, earlier, this person is dating their genetic granddaughter, sort of thing. Or that person is dating their uncle. I mean, not literal uncle, but genetically speaking, you're dating people who you should not be, or more correctly, you're procreating with people you have no business procreating with, because it's not all right. But when there are only so many genetic possibilities, you're better off letting it play out naturally, because if, as I continue my genetic coding over and over and over again, there's a disproportionate number of, I'm now limiting the number of possibilities because I keep creating half copies of me. Half of my DNA is in so many people that now I am limiting the number of possible people that exist. I mean, in a genetic fashion. As you saturate the gene pool with one person, you're going to get more and more people who simply look and act like me.
Right, right. And that could definitely skew the species overall significantly. One of the
And
things, I'm glad you brought up the natural progression of the human genome, and one of the things I'd like to ask you about is the concept of human devolution, and whether you think that's a real risk and how it could be combated, perhaps.
de-evolution, my short answer is de-evolution is theoretically impossible. Not because it is truly impossible, it's theoretically impossible because we are always evolving to meet the new standard. Now, the new standard may be less. The new standard may be so minimal that we have no reason to continue growing in this way. We may actually seemingly take a step back, but we are evolving to meet the new criteria as a species. The new criteria may just be minimal, is the problem. And the argument could be made that we are already, and I mean this as a genome, as an existence of human. I don't mean this on a societal level. You could already make the argument that we are devolving because our ancestors, not many generations ago, could physically endure hardships that would mentally break most of us today. They had to. There wasn't a choice. There was no other option. You had to be able to do this or you wouldn't survive. And now we
And a lot
are
of people didn't survive. A lot of people
right.
didn't.
And they didn't, and their lifespans were significantly shorter. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that when you lived out on the prairie and a herd of or a pack of wolves came up to the house, you had to fight them off and you were going to get your arms and legs bit. But if you didn't fight them off, then they were going to eat you on top of it. It's one thing to get bit, it's another thing to die. And in the process of that, yes, you suffer, you heal, does damage to your body, and all of the other things in society at the time, they they lived to 50, not to 80.
If
But they
that, I
could,
think like prior to 1800, the average lifespan was like 35, maybe
right.
36. It was
It's a lot
shockingly
easier.
low.
It's a lot easier to be married for your whole life when you only live to 40. I will give it
Right. That's funny though. I never thought about that before.
that. But by that token, imagine somebody today, the typical suburban kid. I don't mean child, I mean 23-year-old being attacked by a pack of wolves. Even if they thought about how to fight them off, and even if they were able to, they would be so trauma filled, they would be so mentally broken, they would be functionally disabled more or less the rest of their life. And I'm not trying to pick on anybody who's seen this, who's actually suffered through this. That would be horrible and traumatic, and I'm not in denial of that. But you didn't have the option years ago that you suffered trauma, that this would happen to you. We're going to help bandage you up and get you up on your feet again, but you got to get back out to the field or we don't eat. And that's why I say you could make the argument that we are already devolving,
Yeah.
depending
Well,
upon what, depending entirely upon what your standard of de-evolution is.
the interesting thing about that is there's actually a significantly larger amount of, I guess you could say, diversity in that respect. I mean, there was I think it was, he might have been a basketball player or an NFL linebacker. I can't remember who, but he was
Okay.
jogging up in the mountains of Colorado and he was attacked by a mountain lion. And so, but when the paramedics arrived on scene, he had killed this mountain lion with his bare hands. Now, he needed serious medical attention, but he was this prime athlete who was able to take down a mountain lion with his
Right.
bare hands. That's nothing short of Herculean.
Right.
So, the vast majority of individuals can get by without having to actually strive or suffer through, you know, the kinds of hardships that make you into something powerful. Although there's plenty to complain about when it comes to life, don't get me wrong. But then you
Yeah.
have these other individuals that push themselves to these pinnacles of achievement that you wouldn't have been able to achieve before just because you lack nutrition. So we've got this much bigger spectrum on that particular front.
Sure. But my only point is, if you're asking about de-evolution, the question becomes, how are you defining devolving? Are you defining it as physically or mentally or emotionally? Are you defining it as societal standards? Because it all depends upon your specific perspective.
What if the only
And
parameter you cared about was IQ?
then we are still evolving. We are continuing to get smarter as we continue to study new things, and to Star Trek, new seek out strange new worlds, new life and new civilizations. Well, we may not be doing it in outer space, but the continued study of everything, we are evolving, we are getting smarter as a species as time goes by.
Globally,
The
that's for sure. I'm not sure if that's still the case in the last 50 to 100 years in America, but globally, yeah. I mean, we're getting a lot richer, and the more people you lift out of poverty, the more intelligent they become. I mean, malnutrition prevents the development of your full IQ potential by a lot.
Absolutely. But there's a place where, too, if you're going to say IQ is your standard, IQ is great, and I don't want people to walk around being idiots. I don't want everybody to be um, suffer mental retardation. I don't want to be I'm not talking about that. But what good is your intelligence if you are sitting in your bedroom doing nothing but reading books and watching YouTube? Your intelligence, it takes no one factor. I mean, no one factor alone can be the source of evolution or devolution.
That's
It,
true. Yeah, it's a very complex, multivariate equation. I
right.
think the reason that IQ would be a good contender is because it's effectively the best parameter we have at the moment. I mean, so like
It,
trait conscientiousness, from what I've read, allows you to predict somebody's socioeconomic status with a success rate of about 25%.
sure.
Because conscientiousness is how hard you work, and that's a pretty good guess. 25% is good by psychological standards, but with if you know the individual's IQ, you can predict their socioeconomic status with a success rate of about 50%. So hard work matters, but intelligence is about twice as important.
Right.
So,
And if you know both factors, you start coming in, yeah.
right.
But when you, but then you get to a weird question of which matters more and how do we get to where we're at in society today? Is it that hard work got us here, or is that intelligence made things so we could do the hard work to get us here? And the answer is it takes both. A
Along with a
really,
lot of other things too.
right, a really hard worker with a shovel can only dig so big a ditch in one day. A really smart worker with a backhoe can only dig so big a hole in any one day because he has no idea how to properly operate that backhoe. But if you put a smart and hardworking guy in that backhoe, there's a clear winner of who does what. And then we have to talk about, well, who built the shovel, who built the backhoe, how did that's where all of the other factors come in.
Hmm. And I think capitalism has played a wonderful role in that. I mean, incentivizing weird geniuses to just get really good at one particular thing so that everyone else can benefit from that. And that's essentially
Right.
the concept of the assembly line taken to the penultimate extreme. And it's
Well,
been an amazing thing for technology.
even not even the car or the backhoe, even just the shovel itself being manufactured on some amount of assembly line. You got a bunch of wooden poles that you shave the ends off and file down, and then you mold the metal and you slap it on one end, and you mold a handle and you put it on the other. And you do that as a somebody gets paid to make the shovel that I buy. Granted, at this point in history, it's a machine that's doing all of it, but we're going way, way back. Somebody was paid to make the shovel that somebody else bought. And yeah. So how do you, going back to your original question, how do you, is what about de-evolution? It all depends on what your parameters are. There are many people of any number of varying religious beliefs that would say society is degrading and devolving in such a way that they don't even really want to continue in society because, oh my God, how can we possibly do this? This is awful. Is it awful? I mean, it
Life
depends
is
on your
pretty damn good right now.
well, but they're talking about morality. They're talking about the endless promiscuity, the weird skewing of this or that or the other. I'm not taking sides in either one of these on any of this. I'm not going down one way or the other. I'm saying depending upon your parameters, and in the case of many religious people, they would say that society is falling apart as we speak because of the complete and utter lack of morality by their view of what morality is. I, I'd be hard pressed to argue with them, but that doesn't mean I agree. From their standpoint, they are correct. Are we devolving, or are we evolving? Maybe we weren't meant to live like this indefinitely. Maybe we're moving on, and it's a place that these people just can't accept.
You're a very diehard relativist, aren't you?
Well, I think you almost have to be. If you're going to be intellectually honest, you have to. Real life is such that you can't. A plant never stops growing. a tree grows until it literally dies. Even in the wintertime when it has shed its leaves, it grows a little bit. That's why there's rings. It doesn't stop, it continues very slowly. And at the intellectual level that society is today, humans should intellectually and emotionally be trees. I understand where society was. I lived in a time when gay people coming out of the closet was a new thing. It was a very weird concept at the time. Today, people come out of the closet, we're like, yeah, and everybody kind of goes, yeah, we knew, whatever. Like nobody cares. It just doesn't matter anymore. But it mattered at one point in time. And I'm not talking about right or wrong. I'm saying society evolved, and emotionally and intellectually, I have to evolve with the times, or the times will leave me behind, and I become this very outdated curmudgeon who nobody wants to talk to because I just don't understand.
Right, right.
So,
Well, you
so
also
yes,
have to be, sorry, I won't cut you off. Please
no,
continue.
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that you also have to, if you genuinely care about some specific things as an ethical and moral person, you have to pick your battles. And
Yes, absolutely.
there's a certain point where there's a compromise, so to speak. And if you alienate yourself from the culture at large on every single tiny little topic, by the time you get around to something that actually matters, no one will consider your voice to have any credibility. So I think that's a wise approach.
Yes, I'd agree. And I don't want to be, so I'm going to do something here that I feel almost guilty about, but I don't want to bore the viewers. So I think this is a really good stopping point. That way we don't make this that way we don't make this video way too long for people. If you want, I'm happy to talk to you again some other time about anything you want.
Okay. Okay. Any closing thoughts?
Not in particular. No, but it was good to see you, like literally see you, even if it's through a camera.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while.
I will talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having this conversation with me. And
Absolutely. Talk to you later.
goodbye.